Okay, so here's an experiment for you. This is a little bit different kind of a show where I bring somebody on and just say, it's yours. Go for it. Let's see what happens. Because I get hit up on Twitter with, hey, what about this? And I look at it and it's questions like, well, how can you still be a Republican? I don't think I can answer that in 140 characters or even 10 tweets at 140 characters. So the whole point of Neighbors, again, is to kind of get past the surface level talking points and to dive into something deeper, right? So this is my first attempt at bringing on a listener who hit me up on Twitter and just said, hey, what about this? And in this case, it was, hey, what about the liberal bashing? And see where it goes. And I think this goes in a direction that you're really going to be fascinated by. Let's get right into the episode, okay? I'll figure out a name for what I call these later when I just have somebody on and say, just go for it. Ask me whatever you want, throw whatever you want out there, and, we'll see where it goes. My name is sethtowerhurd, and this is like a whole new kind of episode. Let's be neighbors again.
And if we can't walk in love, we're a noisy little gong, a bitter little song that a bully sings out of key. And if we can't walk in peace, we'll forget about the least of these. A mother crying on her knees for a boy who's locked away. There's a voice calling me.
All right, so this is a new one. Ian Philpot and I used to work together at a nonprofit in Chicago. He is a graduate, by the way, of the Alt MBA with Seth Godin. If you're familiar with what that is, you know that's actually really cool. And writes about politics on Medium. It looks like some, yes,
some, yeah.
So okay, and then you work in marketing by day, right?
Yeah, all day, every day.
All right, so actually, I mean, you kind of own this episode because I'm going to get into a couple Twitter questions, but this is more like a feedback episode or something like that.
Okay.
So, I mean, go for it. It's your agenda, man. Go for it.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with how I got here, and that is I'd been listening to Seth's episodes. I've been following him for a little bit, tracking on his podcast stuff, just because I know you're a really smart guy and you're always having great conversations. And so I started listening, and it seemed like for this whole neighbors thing, you were getting a lot of neighbors who may have been closer to how you feel or how you were raised. So I loved that you had the director of Counterpunch on. He was giving a little different perspective, and there's that great tweet conversation you guys had, which was fun to watch.
Yeah, and actually, let me jump in. I was really impressed. He came back and we talked a little bit, over email, and I just said, hey man, like anybody can have a bad interview. It's not that big a deal. Anybody can have a bad day. In the future, maybe this is how I would kind of frame some of these conversations so you'll continue to get positive press. But I wasn't bothered by any of it. Have you taken StrengthsFinder?
Have I?
Yeah. The business test StrengthsFinder. Yeah. So I got the full list. My bottom two are competition. So I'm not motivated by being competitive with you. Like if we were both selling cars or something like that, I probably wouldn't be that good at it because I'm not motivated by being number one in the sales chart. And then my bottom one was harmony. So I was just like,
that's awesome.
Things together, like it doesn't bother me. People don't like me. Like, not that I'm even angry back. It's like when Amanda and I got married, she kind of told me, she's like, yeah, I think your one friend's wife doesn't like you. And I was like, okay. That's kind of the end of the conversation. Like, I don't really have anything else to say about that. Let me jump in right there just a bit. So, and I'll let you flesh this idea out, but it has been easier to book people, I guess, who maybe are coming a little bit more from my perspective than it has to book people who are not from maybe my leaning. So I've been begging the Democratic Party of Kenosha, Wisconsin, to come on the podcast for like months. And I mean, there's probably somebody within 8 to 10 blocks of my apartment who could come on the show, and I keep getting turned down. So you don't know who I'm trying to book, and I have a lot more feelers out there than I've able to get on. I think part of it is people are suspicious. If you're not like them, they think you're just they're trying to get you on the show to like do the cable news thing where you just beat up on them, which is not the case at all. So it maybe not for lack of effort. Also, the episode I just dropped today, you probably haven't had a chance to listen to. It's about the Trump tweets and the transgender troop thing. So it's with a female helicopter pilot vet who's also worked in legislation, who is very pro transgender troops. And I had no idea where she was going to go. I just the guy that left the NRA, that episode, Joe Plensler, Marine Corps vet, he just said, hey, have Kyle Ann on about this. And so I did. And so anyway, you can continue on with wherever you're going to go on that.
Yeah. So I was going to get into, one thing that's really interesting, and I think you read this as you were reading that Medium post, you saw what I did in Alt MBA. So in the Alt MBA program, one of the segments we covered was empathy. And it was really much talking about understanding someone else's worldview. So we did the Alt MBA breaks stuff down in projects. And so you have a prompt that you're working on with a cohort. And so there's a group of us who were talking a ton about empathy. And it was one of the first things we covered in that course. And it was really challenging to try to understand someone else's perspective. And I didn't want to take the easy route and go with politics because I felt like it was too easy. I wanted to challenge myself more. But then in the end, I ended up going with it. And so I wrote this piece called Trumpathy. It's on Medium. I passed it along to Seth before we hopped in this conversation. And
it'll be in the show notes as well. I'll throw it up,
awesome.
Whatever podcast app you use, you can just scroll over and grab it there. So go ahead.
So when I wrote that piece, it was really writing from the perspective of a friend of mine, but I don't make that clear until you get way to the end of what I'm trying to discuss. And so I'm sharing the perspective of someone else who is a Trump supporter. Granted, this was just before the primaries ended last year. So there was no proof that he was really going to win it all at that point, but it looked like it could be that way. And so I was trying to understand, why would my friend support Donald Trump? And so I thought about his life, I thought about his history, and then I wrote this post where it was, his main concern is about keeping his family safe. His main concern is about keeping his job. His main concern is about the economy. It's all about his concerns. And when I understood those, I have those same concerns. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to have my family be unsafe. And that's where I'm coming from. So that's like this common ground. I feel like this, like at that level, when we're honest with each other, we get to the core of how we feel and where life is at. That's where like we can truly admit to being neighbors. We have the same fears. We have the same concerns. We want the same problems that are caused by a society fixed. And that's the perspective I'm coming from. So I've heard you like hit on a couple nerves, but that's where I was reaching out to you to say there's like some root stuff where we are neighbors on, because we truly agree that there are problems in society and we need to fix them. It's just we each have a different perspective on how it's done.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you said, what's with the liberal bashing? So where was the liberal bashing? No, I mean, just where was the liberal bashing?
So there were a couple times you were talking about, you were talking with a friend of yours who's a CFO, and you guys were talking about the important, like how some people think that society needs a safety net or everyone needs to start from like the same platform. And you guys like circled around that quite a bit. And I not a ton. I feel like there was more room for you guys to talk. And I think you have a part 2 coming up where you're going to discuss even more with her eventually.
Yeah, no. Okay. So we'll get back to that one. Okay. Like, let's get the list. And then we'll kind of hit point by point.
So there was that, I do believe that society should be set up in a way that people should get a common ground to jump off from. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's actually better so this is something you're not big on, but competition, or better for society as a whole. Right.
Well, no, it's not that I'm not into competition. On the StrengthsFinder test, I don't I'm not super motivated by being competitive with you in the workplace. Okay. Yeah, that doesn't mean I'm against all competition. I mean, I do triathlon, so obviously right. Go ahead.
So that's where I'm coming from. During the Alt MBA, there's another book we read called Finite and Infinite Games. And in that book, it talks about like how everything is a game, and the set of rules that we participate in those games are sort of understood, and someone only wins a game when everyone stops playing, or there's like this mutual agreed upon ending to the game. So if you think about this, it's like, what if 2 baseball teams kept playing after the 9th inning?
Okay.
It's like so the referees could leave the field, the announcers could leave, the fans could leave, but if the teams keep playing, the game isn't over. And then it's like, well, okay, well, what if the pitcher picks up a beach ball and throws it at the batter? Like, okay, well, this isn't a normal rule for that game. But if the batter swings at it and the people in the field start playing with the beach ball instead of the baseball, like suddenly we change the rules of the game and everyone has just accepted this rule change. So applying that to business or applying that to education and saying like, okay, well, what if these people who are winning at life or who are succeeding at life, who do really good in their jobs or do really good for the economy or do really good for capitalism, like whatever those things are, what if those people on top aren't the best people to be doing that? They just had such a greater advantage that they're playing a game that other people just can't even participate in because they didn't have the same advantages. They don't have the same education. They could be working really, really hard, but because their jumping point wasn't the same spot, it's been harder for them to reach it. And so they can't even play that game because they didn't start from the same spot.
Okay, so what was your upbringing like? What was your childhood like? Because you seem local, like you seem
right.
Okay,
right. So the suburbs of Chicago.
Okay, so what did your parents do?
So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was blue collar. He worked for a security systems company. He still does.
And where'd you go to college at, or like what was your path to a career?
It was a rocky long path. So I worked after high school. Did junior college for a little bit, was off and on, part-time, full-time, then went to Columbia College Chicago for a semester. That was a little too expensive, so I dialed it back. I kept working. I ended up at Northern Illinois University. I got my degree in 2 years there, working full-time and going to school full-time. And that's what led me to, I ended up getting a job. I was also doing an internship during all of that. I ended up getting a job for Willow Creek Community Church doing web content.
Okay, so that's how you got into marketing and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, just what's funny about you kind of put that in the category of liberal bashing. I think Christina's actually a Democrat. So we were friends in like elementary school, and then I didn't even realize like she moved back to the county where we grew up, second poorest county in Illinois, and I messaged she and her husband had opened a gluten-free brewery because
awesome,
got a gluten allergy. So I messaged the Facebook account or whatever and just said, hey, are you guys open? I'm coming home to deer hunt. And so in a roundabout way, that's how she wound up on the podcast. I'm actually going to go back to episode number it's one of the first 5, Colin Woodard. I think the episode's called American Nations, and he talks about how regional differences way trump like everything else, like political differences in the United States. I think where that like everybody where I'm from is from the central part of Pennsylvania or from Kentucky. Seriously, like everybody. It's very Scots, Irish, and German. And it's very like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And the culture that we came out of was one where, I mean, it's very community oriented, but it's also very self-reliant and somewhat distrusting of outsiders for sure. Mm-hmm. And, when I mentioned like, statistically, like we should have been at a huge disadvantage, right? And of the kids I grew up with, I mean, 2 major CFOs,
right?
Like that's incredible. An inventor of a new kind of roofing tape, the highest paid initial graduate from one of the top engineering schools in Missouri. And I mean, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Of my 10 cousins that I grew up in closest proximity with, I would say like half of us have advanced degrees, maybe 7 of us, 10.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, pretty crazy, right? So statistically, like, was the playing field equal when I talk about like the access to, the big things, which is like capital and network? Like nobody could loan us money to start a business. Nobody really had the kind of connections that I've been able to build in Chicago, where I can get to people. I now have, pretty solid connections in the entertainment industry where a TV producer and I have been working on a couple of like 3 TV show concepts at this point. They're actually going to get pitched in Hollywood. Like someone will listen to them. That doesn't mean that they're going to become shows, but I at least know how to get there. There's nothing like that in Pike County, right? Like there's nobody to run into that's throwing around that kind of weight. But we grew up in a system where you make your own luck. And, I think that exists completely outside of politics. The county overwhelmingly actually votes Democrat, or has historically. I don't know where it's at. I think it went way, way, way Trump this time around, and I think it maybe went Obama in '08. So if you're thinking like hardline, rural conservative, there's certainly an element to that culturally, but I don't know that the voting record stacks up against that.
Got it. Yeah. So I would say, I mean, it's always funny when you talk about regions. So it sounds like, to me, what you're saying with all those people who ended up being very successful or advanced sort of stuff, schooling wise, I immediately think of like in the Olympics, it's like the same Olympians who like keep going up for like ping pong all grew up in the same neighborhood. It was like they were all like 2 blocks within each other. And so it's like they all had the same teacher or same mentor, or they like worked with each other. So they were able to build some of those skills. Growing up, like, I don't know that there are that many successful people out of my graduating class. And I was one of 3 high schools in my town. And there were like 300 of us who graduated just from my school. So there were like probably close to 1,000 students who graduated that year. And I don't know that any of them are as successful as like the 3 or 4 you rattled off. Like, it just didn't happen.
Like in a world where I was the top of my class and, like 13 kids. I mean, public schools, it's a little bigger now. Now public schools in that county churn out 35 kids. So, some schools have consolidated.
Like almost tripled. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Some schools have consolidated.
Okay.
I mean, I usually tell people I'm a 1%er. I'm from the 1% of Americans who grew up on working farms. And I feel like that's given me a stupid unfair advantage in life because I just know how to outwork everybody. Scott, the first CFO I had on, who probably has the highest IQ of anybody I've ever met. I mean, like he's been tested. He has the highest IQ of anybody I've ever met. I don't know if he'd want me saying that publicly, but oh well. His dad he mentioned his dad was a construction worker and farmer, got up at 4 a.m. And he said he got to sleep till 5:30 a.m. when he was CFO at Morningstar to take the train. And he felt like he got an extra hour and a half of sleep. As far as like what the level playing field is, I look at like I have part of my extended family's from Laos, right? And like my cousin's grandpa came over, and he I believe he has like a PhD. He either has a master's degree or a PhD from France. Speaks 3 to 5 languages. I forget exactly where he lands. Was a superintendent of a school district, educated in Europe. Comes over here, has to start all the way over working at Sears overnight. Himself and his kids have been so stupid successful in the face of every single obstacle that you could possibly think of, like showing up, basically having to live off the kindness of strangers, not speaking the language. What's interesting is that under the right circumstances, it's actually the people that have the roughest road that win the most. Jeff Bezos from Amazon. The difference is that even though you might not have access to money and capital, the difference, I believe, is that you have people that are pointing you to say you can make it. And I actually think that's the real killer in life, is if you go through your first 18 years and never have anybody point to something and say you can go get that. My grandfather was orphaned at the age of 2 when his mom got killed by a cow on the farm, and the rest of the kids went to an orphanage, and an aunt took him home because he was like 2 years old or whatever. Had to drop out in 8th grade to butcher hogs for a living because they wouldn't let him go to school anymore, the people who took him in. And he never made any money in his life. Basically a subsistence farmer, but he pointed, all the time he pointed to education, he pointed to opportunity, he wanted me to go get it. That not having that, in my opinion, is like the real disadvantage in life, because anything else you can overcome, but if you don't know you can go get it, that's a disadvantage. So what are your thoughts?
So I'll go into a little bit of my family history. So my grandfather grew up in rural Mississippi, a little town called Pyland. You can't find it on a map, like literally population 20. Yeah. So real small town. It's right outside Houston, Mississippi, which for a long time was the sweet potato capital of North America. But so his dad walked like 5 miles a day to his job because they didn't have a family car. He made, I think it was either $5 a day or $5 a week. I think it was $5 a week. So crazy that he came from that. And he was one of like 6 kids who grew up in this shack of a house. It was like 3 rooms. It was incredibly small, still standing. But then he joined the Navy. He came up to Great Lakes Naval Base. That's where he ended his career. He met my grandmother, who was a bit of a townie in Crystal Lake. That's the town I still live in. There's a lot of family history there. I went to the same high school as my great-grandfather and my grandmother and my parents, and we now live there, so my kids will hopefully go there one day, 5th generation. But my grandfather moved to town, started working for Standard Oil, eventually started his own company. Because that's just what you like. You work hard enough that you can do your own thing. He sold it, retired, came out of retirement, bought a company, and ran that. They're slowly closing it down now. But like in all of that, I don't know what it was. There's something different with that generation. Whereas my parents, my dad was hardworking. Again, my mom was stay at home, and he was just brought up differently from them. And then, and then there's me. Like I grew up and had to, my parents, my dad has an associate's degree from the same junior college that I ended up getting my associate's degree from. But like, I didn't have those advantages. My parents got divorced right before I finished high school. And so their money was like split 2 ways, and things did not shake out well. So I had to make things happen for myself. So that's why I was off and on full-time, part-time with junior college. That's why I ended up taking a couple semesters off when I was trying to go for my bachelor's degree, because I had to work and go to school at the same time. And even though I was doing all of that work, there were times when I just like could not get beyond. Like there was no amount of hard work I could do that would get me through school, that would get me into a job that was decent paying. So I did get through school. So there's like the 3 things that different socioeconomic classes believe causes success. So like upper class believes that it's hard work, middle class believes that it's education and intelligence, and then the lower class believes it's luck. And so I don't know if it was luck or divine providence, but I ended up getting my first job doing web content at Willow Creek. And that was like a major surprise for me, because I never thought I would get there. Like there was no way that should have happened because of where I was at 5 years before or 10 years before coming out of high school. There was no way I was on a path to get that job, really. And then I ended up getting that job. And then there's no way that would set me on the path. I'm a marketing director now for a decent sized company, hopefully going to get like 100 million in revenue this year. And like, that's just where I'm at. I never thought, like, there was no way I would have believed that I would be in this job today based on where I was 10 years ago.
And, you know, ironically, and this is why when I think I'm going to make this a regular feature, when somebody just kind of pops something on Twitter, I'm like, let's just do it on the show, because you just can't do this 140 characters at a time.
Right.
You know, so, you know, my dad and I pretty much parted ways. He was pretty emotionally and at times physically abusive when I was growing up. I mean, we parted ways when I hit him. And, you know, that my mom was teaching in a Christian high school, making, I mean, way less money than I've ever made in my life. So, you know, I got 3 jobs. I tried to play basketball that year, blew my knee out, got 3 jobs. That summer I was 19. I was busting up concrete by day, like actually like taking out concrete so they could be parking lots could be repoured. So I was like swinging a sledgehammer. It's kind of romantic, actually. And then I would work at the mall, like in the afternoons, evenings. I was selling high-end women's shoes, and I actually made, I mean, there was a few weeks where I made $3,000 selling women's shoes. Then on the weekends, on Saturday nights, I would leave the radio station. I would leave the mall. I would go to a country radio station in Iowa, across the river, and I would sleep on their couch for about 90 minutes, set my cell phone alarm, get up and work midnight to 6 a.m., and that's how I got in the air. 3 months later, I was, I sent my tape to Shine.fm, which is now a Midwestern radio network. I got on as a morning show producer for about 6 months, and I got on nights, and then a combination of mornings and afternoons for a decade, during that, which led to, in turn, doing on-camera work for an Emmy-winning show, being the host of another nationally syndicated show, writing for, a bunch of magazines. And I guess the thing is like, if I hadn't been okay to do that 3rd job when I was 19, like none of this, I mean, I wouldn't have any of it. And the thing about radio is I'm never going to do it again. I'm just not really interested in it. but it gave me the network I needed to do everything else. So, as far as this conversation, and I'm totally cool to have it. Like, I look at, like, this is like the fourth time I've used this, but Facebook is Facebook because Zuckerberg had a rich roommate whose parents bankrolled it, right? Okay, there's only so many of those slots. And quite frankly, most of the really good schools, like most of those are going to legacy admissions, where you get in because your parents got in, right? And it's totally subjective. There's kids all across the country that get a 36 on the ACT and don't get into Harvard, right? Which is where the money, where the thing that's more valuable than money, the network, is, right? So what are your thoughts on evening the playing field?
I don't know that I know how to do that. And I mean, sorry, just to get to that Harvard comment you just made, I'd heard something recently that kids who do really well in school, they're valedictorian or they do great on their whatever, ACTs, SATs, like they have a harder time succeeding in life than people who have a harder time getting through their education. I'll see if I can find the article, send it to you, and maybe you can add that in show notes or something.
And it's because the reason for that is because succeeding in school is all about depositing things in your short-term memory. It's the only skill.
Right.
And nobody really cares if you can memorize things 2 weeks at a time in a job. They just don't.
Yeah.
But no, go ahead. So with like,
so I think to even the playing field, this is gonna give away the pony I had in the race of the last general election. But I feel like community college should be more readily available to people, and if that means cutting out the cost of it and taking that as a burden on the states, there's plenty of proof that says greater education or more education for people means that they will be more successful at life. They'll earn more for their family. They will leave their kids in a better place than they were. I got to believe that a better education that's free or far reduced. I mean, even in my county, the community college that we were a part of, they started doing a program where if you volunteered for like 100 hours of community service over the course of a semester, they paid for your school. You still had to cover books, but it was like I knew kids who were planning on going to 4-year schools who dropped that just because they found out that for 100 hours over the course of the semester, which was like 10 hours a week, less than that, they could get a free associate's degree. Like that was a big deal. So they signed up for that and they got credit for that. And I thought that was fantastic. It wasn't available to me, but I was glad it was available to them. And I hope something like that is available to my kids so that they can get education at a reduced cost or free by either giving back to the community or because society realizes like, oh, this is actually beneficial for everyone. And take some of the cost out of it so that everyone can get that standard to try to make our society better.
So obviously a huge Ted Cruz fan when you said you
so me and Ted, bromance right there. So an interesting note on that. And like I said, I don't speak on topics that I haven't read and researched pretty well, so I have no idea how I feel about junior college right now. An interesting note on that is I did get free junior college by being valedictorian. Awesome. So I was able to go down that route. I mean, again, it's pretty easy in a class size of that magnitude. 13,
right? Yeah. And I will. I'm actually going to throw to a retired UFC fighter here who went back into active duty in Special Forces, Tim Kennedy, who Instagrammed recently of him on duty in Iraq, and it said, "Believe it or not, you can get free education and healthcare." So I feel like there is. Like if you want it, there's options. And actually, I talked about in the last episode, the military was not an option for me, even though I looked at it. I'm like doubly disqualified. I have an extra rib that's an automatic disqualification, and a peanut allergy is an automatic disqualification because like the whole military diet's based on peanut butter. It seems like. Right. So that option wasn't available to me. I'm
in that same boat. I wasn't able to do it. I got ophthalmologic migraines that were chemical imbalance in my brain, which meant that when I was under extreme stress, I would lose my peripheral vision and get like, they were ophthalmolgic. So I normally didn't get like headaches. It was all vision based. And it was like, great. So it was like, whatever, 9/11 happened right before I was graduating high school. And I was looking into the Marines as an option. And then I was like, wait a second, I went to my doctor and I was like, hey, so I'm trying to get into this. And he's like, well, how are the migraines doing? I was like, well, I still get them when I do sports because I did sports all through high school. And he was like, do you still lose vision? And I was like, yeah, but I can play sports. And he was like, so what you're telling me is you're going into the Marines where you may end up in combat and you can't see the guy next to you and you may not be able to see the enemy in front of you. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, I don't think that's a good idea. So I had to go back to the staff sergeant and be like, hey, so I talked to my doctor and this migraine problem actually might not be good for us. And it was tough to have to say no to that because I was looking forward to doing that. But I just like you, didn't have that option. That option was taken away. It was no longer available.
For me, if I fell off of a climbing wall the wrong way and broke that extra rib, I cut an artery, I bleed out, they pay my family $2 million. They don't want to do that. Right, so it's just probably more of a fiscal issue for them. And I mean, this is this is very much like the millennial, kind of political landscape, right? And that statistically, like as millennials get older, they get less into like, what's paid for. Here's where I'll land. Okay. Anytime that I can be shown that a societal problem can be fixed via cash, like I'm in, like, multi-generational poverty, be it in the ghetto or the trailer park, has it has a cultural cost, it has a financial cost. We're even just super selfishly, if people who are caught in multi-generational poverty are able to work and not go to jail, that's a huge cost savings for the taxpayer, right? So I'm up for anything it looks like we got to wrap this up, but that fixes those problems. Where you and I may differ is there's been a lot, and I'm not even a guy that's like I'm not a libertarian at all, where I'm saying like let's roll back some of this stuff. But as far as expanding, my question is like why we've had programs and programs and programs since the Great Depression, and we don't seem to have fixed that yet. So I'm open to anything that's going to be a reversal of multi-generational poverty. I'm not convinced that I've seen anything yet that's worth tax dollars. That's probably the biggest difference between us.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of countries that avoid poverty by, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole fully, but providing healthcare so that it doesn't bankrupt families, or by providing free education because then they can get higher educated jobs. And I mean, and that's the other thing, like, unskilled labor in the United States is going to go away very quickly, very soon, with the advent of robotic technology. I mean, people have been talking about this since the 80s, and we're actually seeing like full factories, instead of moving to Mexico, they're just replacing people with robots. They have to redo like the entire manufacturing floor to make space for these robots to work, but it is way less expensive over time. There are no benefits costs. There's no healthcare costs. Robots don't need to take vacations, or they don't get sick. They do break down, which is probably the only thing that slows things down. But other than that, it's a major issue. I think maybe there's another time I could come on and we could have a full conversation about basic guaranteed income, but I won't go into that now.
No, I would be way over that over a welfare state. Hand out money, and I'm actually way for that. So here's the thing. Some people are going to spend it on meth, and some people are going to open a business and get their family out of poverty. And the people that are going to spend it on meth actually trade their social services benefits around like cash anyway. So all we're really doing is hurting people who would be more creative and resourceful with elevating their lives.
Yeah.
By not doing a basic guaranteed income. I'd rather just do a flat minimum cash, and then as your income goes up, like it slowly reduces until you're at like a living wage. That actually, right. I find that to be way more interesting than what we're doing right now.
Then that's awesome. I feel like we agree on that.
Okay,
that's great.
You got to get back to work. It looks like we can totally do this again. I think this is an interesting, fascinating concept to just let people come on and just kind of riff on a topic. So
I appreciate you
for the time, man. We'll go ahead and throw this episode out and see what happens. All right.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for having me on.